Hey everybody, it's Ellen Lewis and it's time for Lunchtime Live. It's Tuesday and I'm so happy you're here. Thank you. I don't know if you had a chance to read the newsletter this morning, but it was kind of an intro and a promo to the concept of short rows. I love short rows. I think they're gorgeous. They do magical things with self-striping yarn like Noro. And other kinds of things. But, you know, from a functional standpoint, I think they're really great. They are uniquely qualified to do certain things with your fabric. So I thought what I would do is just give you a minute and see if what your experience is with short rows, and if you had any particular questions about them that I could answer for you today. So let me just back up and say that, where are my notes? So what is a short row? Okay, so a short row is simply when you are not working all of your stitches. You stop before the end of the row and you turn and you go back and you work the stitches that you just worked again, leaving a section of the other stitches unworked. Hi, Becky. Hi, Terry. Nice to see you. We're talking about short rows. You guys love short rows? Tell me in the comments if you've done short rows before. Hi, Lori. Okay, so Lori is using the coconuts method, which is very cool. So like I said in the newsletter today, there are half a dozen ways to work your short rows. And I guess I'd like to maybe go back and say, there's one way to work your short row, which is to stop and turn. There are a million ways to prevent that gap that you would get. So I was playing with this a little bit earlier, and I wanted to show you what would happen. So let's say you've got 100 stitches and your pattern tells you to work 75 stitches and then turn and work a short row. So if you were to work those stitches and then turn, you see there's this gap. There's this big hole in the fabric where you turned your work. And what you want to do with anytime you work a short row, if you don't mean to have that gap, and there are plenty of times where you might need to have that gap. A lot of times short rows are used to shape a neckline. But for the purposes of today's conversation, the reason that you would work a short row is to create a shape in your fabric. So you don't want that big hole in your fabric. So as you're working your short row, before you turn and work back, you have to do something to prevent that gap. The most typical method is a wrap and turn. So what that means is that you're wrapping your working yarn. And I'm making videos on this. I filmed one this morning and I'll be putting that out this week. The most common way is to wrap your yarn around the head of the first stitch of those that are being left. And that's a wrap and turn short row. And I can show you that close up in the video. So watch for that. And then you work back. Another method that people like a lot, my personal favorite, is the German short row, which is to work that stitch and then bring it over. The whole point of any of these methods, Lori mentioned the coconuts the coconut short row method, which is also really nice. The whole point of all of these things that you do before you turn your work and work back and leave those other stitches unworked is to make sure that there's not a hole. So why would you work a short row at all? A short row creates a shape in your fabric. I've used this, my favorite giant pink yarn, to show you. So you can see that what I did is I knit across to my last 3 stitches and I didn't work them again. I turned and I worked back. And then I came down and I worked to my last 6 stitches and I turned and I worked back. And then I worked to my last 9 stitches and I turned and I worked back. So you can see that the sections where I didn't work those stitches each time are shallower, okay? There's more length on this, obviously, the section where I did more rows. And yeah, there are other ways that you can make a short row effect. I mean, you could increase or you could cast on more stitches and make this diagonal. But what short rows are uniquely qualified to do is to create extra length within your fabric. So this is a fairly simple example of a short row, and you would use this if you were shaping a shoulder on a garment. So, you want a shaped shoulder to be about an inch difference in depth. And rather than binding off and working across and then binding off your last stitches, you can work short rows, which gives you a nice smooth edge. But what a short row really is uniquely qualified to do is to create extra fabric length within this center. So if you are working a bust dart in a sweater, a pullover, you can give yourself extra length in the bust right here, so that when you put your sweater on, if you're busty, it's not too short in the front, and you don't have to make both the front and the back longer or larger. You just have this extra length in the center, which I think is absolutely magical. I love the way that short rows can do that. So, I mean, there's a lot of other really, really playful and fun ways that you can use short rows. Like I'm working that Noro dress that has the short rows. And since Noro self stripes, you get this beautiful kind of stacking of color. And you've seen, I'm sure, Rigolis, which is a beautiful shawl that Ginny taught a couple of years ago, where you have these leaf shapes that are created with this striping yarn. And it's just beautiful. So it's a technique that you can play with and make beautiful shapes and fun things, but it also is just super functional for things like your shoulder line, or if you want a curved hem on a garment, you can do a short row to create this curved hem at the bottom. And it's really, really beautiful. So hi, Christina. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Norma. Hi, Ellen. Okay, so Ellen M is all ears, knowing nothing about short rows. So that's fine. So I'll give you a little kind of personal history on my first exposure to short rows, which was back in the dark ages of like 1983 when I started knitting. I could never get my shoulder seams right. I hadn't had any finishing lessons. I didn't know anything about finishing. Good knitter, lousy finisher. And so no matter what I did, they looked really bad when I sewed them up. So I asked somebody at a yarn store, and she said, well, why don't you try a 3-needle bind off? So a 3-needle bind off doesn't work if you've already bound off those stitches. So to work a 3-needle bind off on a short row on a shaped shoulder, you have to have live stitches. So I had to figure out how to do short rows. I was a beginner. So there wasn't any internet, there wasn't any YouTube, but I'm a Watson, and the Watson way was, if you wanted to learn something, you get a book and you learn about it, you read about it. So I have this beautiful collection of reference books, and it was Monsi Stanley who first showed what a short row was and how to do it. And she had everything in her book. It's a fabulous reference book. It's called The Knitter's Handbook. I'll put a link to it in the description. Anyway, so she had every technique in her book listed as essential, nice to know, or like something like practically irrelevant, or you'll never use this. And short rows was one of those things that she had listed as you'll probably never use this. But that was kind of cool to understand that you could work these short rows and then have live stitches and then bind off, do a 3-needle bind off for those together. And I like 3-needle bind off, but I never really thought about it again. And it seems like the shawl shaping lately really has kind of brought short rows back into such vogue, and knitting techniques all enjoy their moment in the sun. But I think short rows is kind of one of those techniques that's going to be with us for a long time, because it really does allow you to create beautiful structural shapes in your fabric. And while I have your attention and I have this here, I just wanted to show you that, as I said in the newsletter, there are half a dozen different ways to wrap that stitch. so that you don't get the gap. And I wanted to show you on this particular fabric. In fact, you know, it might be easier if I shared my screen with you here. Let's see. All right, can you see this? Yeah, so I'm gonna make this bigger if I can. Yeah, that's a little better. And then we'll maybe zoom in a little if I can. All right, that's perfect. Okay, so right here on the far left, you can see that I've got this. This is a wrap and turn method of connecting your short rows right here. And then right here is a German short row. So it's kind of a blob before it's picked up. And then right here is the coconuts method of working a short row, kind of a double stitch, if you will. And when you end up going through and picking up those, when you end up working across all of those stitches, they look pretty much the same. In fact, we have a little bit more time. I'm going to go ahead and show you by finishing these how it all looks after they're picked up. And I've actually done a video on that to show how they look when they're picked up. And trust me, the video looks lots better because it's very close up and you can actually see it. So, but I'm just gonna work through and you can see how nice each one is. So I think part of the reason that short rows are enjoying a moment in the sun is because knitting from the top down is such a popular thing. And in order to create that back neck, a lot of designers use short rows to create that back neck. And it works really well. I think von Hinterstein uses that quite a bit to great effect. So you can see as now I've worked across on these giant awkward needles. Can you see that? All of the short row techniques look pretty much the same on, you know, after you've picked them up or worked them together or joined them with their neighbor. So bottom line is it doesn't really matter which one you use as long as you are using it and you understand what the designer is saying when they say to wrap and turn or to work a German short row. I talk about this in the videos a little bit about how sometimes a designer will say work X number of stitches, work a short row, or, you know, work to your last Y number of stitches, work a short row. So I talk about that in the video and about how you can sort of think about what the designer is trying to tell you when he or she is explaining where to put your next short row, because that's what matters. I mean, it really matters because this is a slope of a particular angle that they're trying to create in their design. So it is important that you understand and that you do the short row in the right spot. Let's see if there are any questions. All right. Okay. So Emily, does that sort of help you understand the questions at all? The concept of short rows at all? I know that there's a lot to it, but I think it's a thing that you can totally get. And I do encourage you to take a look at the videos when I put them out there, because they do give you a close-up look at what the short row is looking like and how to do each one. Not only how to do it, but how to then pick it up when you're working across all of your stitches. So lunchtime lives are supposed to be short and sweet, just 15 minutes. If there are any questions or anything else, I will be happy to answer them real quick. if not, I will see you tomorrow night when we have the wonderful, fabulous designer Tanis Gray for Wednesday night Crazy for You Live. I'm super excited to have her on. So I look forward to seeing you then. And until next time, keep knitting and create something beautiful. I'll see you then.